not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you. Hey, aloha everyone, and thanks for taking the time to listen to another truly unique life story here on the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast. Now, I typically start the podcast with a bit of Hawaiian or Polynesian music, but not today. The story you will hear in this episode, I believe, will cause each listener to reflect on their own life, as my guest Sabrina Capper shares her brave, at times horrific, but ultimately uplifting story. Now, I need to issue a bit of a warning here because if you're going to be triggered by accounts of child abuse, rape, torture, and murder, I suggest you might pass on this life story. I mentioned Sabrina's story is horrific, yet ultimately uplifting because I read her memoir, Licking the Knife. So yeah, I do know a little bit about her story. Sabrina, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We sat here for the last 20, 30 minutes and just kind of talked and chatted and got to know each other even better. I know the subject matter is very personal to you, obviously. At times, like I said in the introduction, horrific. As someone who just read the book, it was hard to read at times because I had so many emotions. Like I told you, I had tears. I wanted to beat the shit out of these guys. It was just, it was a roller coaster. I was all over the place, but I'm so happy you're here today to talk about it.
Thank you. As you mentioned, there's a little note, right? When you open it up, one from me and one from my therapist. My note is the one that says, I'm okay. Like, this story is really hard, but I survived. I'm surviving every day. And so ultimately, I want you to think of it as a happy story because I persevere. And that is a big deal. Second thing is there's a note from my therapist who I have a wonderful relationship with. And she was very insistent on including those trigger warnings that you repeated at the beginning. And I appreciate that. And I do want your listeners to be gentle with themselves. This conversation may be a little difficult at times, but I really feel like it's important that we be uncomfortable for a few moments to have connection.
And I think the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is there's probably a lot more abuse out there of children than we really would have any idea. Because so often it just doesn't get reported. The things are kept inside and for sometimes forever.
Yes. Yes. And even when it does get reported, it is very difficult to listen to a child talk about their tummy hurting and understand what they're really saying. It is also very difficult to understand how to help a child when a parent is overbearing or controlling, as in my case. I think it's not necessarily the reporting issue. I think it's an issue of, do we believe our children when they talk to us and they tell us what's going on, especially their feedback about adults. I have a friend the other day who was talking about her kid fighting with their baseball coach. And I thought that's a very normal occurrence, especially in a competitive atmosphere. But yet when your kid says, I don't enjoy being around this adult because they're hurting me, how do you know what the difference is? And if the author's note, the therapist's note, if my book can help give a little bit more understanding into how do children speak? What are they saying? How do you communicate with them? And how do we ultimately protect them in the future from scenarios like mine?
As you're saying that, I want to read a little bit here what RC said about that. And RC is your therapist. And so
Yes.
this is the part that I wanted to read because I think it just talks about exactly what you're saying. It says, if
Okay.
you have a child in your life that tells you something strange about an adult, like this brave girl did, brave girl being you,
Me.
do not question their motives. Children are not in the business of ruining adults' lives to have fun making accusations like this. So I think that's important too, because yeah, you need to hear them. And maybe if somebody says, I don't like this adult because they hurt me, then maybe you need to ask some questions about what that
Yes.
means.
Yes. And defining what hurt means is so critical, and it takes time. It takes time for a kid to understand the difference between a adult yelling because you're in danger or yelling because they're angry and frustrated, with something else. That definition as adults is not necessarily one we have grown up fostering and nurturing language around the development of the range of emotions that go with some of the words that we've used. My story specifically, like I was sexually abused by many men in the LDS church. My mother would hold me down and dress me up because she thought that was her role, was to prepare me for these purity rituals. And in order to control me, they would torture me and eventually kill people to silence me. And what I found through that time, when I look back, I asked for help 3 very specific times. I asked my mother for help, and you know how that went.
Mm-hmm.
I asked my bishop, my church leader, for help, and that did not go well. And finally, I asked my best friend's mom for help. And that is when they killed someone in front of me to silence me. And they continued doing so.
Sabrina, we need to tell people how old you were when these things were happening. I think that's
Oh,
part of. I mean,
sorry.
it's never okay, but I
Yeah.
think I think it was, man, it just blew my mind that these
Yeah.
things started happening when they did.
Yeah. I told my mom when I was 4, that was the first time it really started happening to a point where I describe it pretty graphically in the book from the child's perspective.
Yep.
I'm trying to think how to articulate, like, for me, the experience was happening. I did not know as a 4-year-old child that seeing men's private parts and having them perform sexual acts on me was inappropriate. I had never even had a conversation about what that kind of actions were. I mean, so when you think about a kid doesn't have the language to say they're hurting me in this way, there's no way to communicate that. However, when you don't have, like, my mom obviously was protecting herself, but even a normal adult, like some school teachers or Relief Society people, like they knew what was going on. Like, when a little girl can't sit down for a week, like, there's something going on.
Mm-hmm.
But what's surprising is it was never allowed or never appropriate or never cared to ask, your tummy hurts. Well, does it feel pokey like a porcupine? Does it feel full? Oh, it's not actually your tummy, it's your butt. Oh, well, what's wrong with, have you gone to the bathroom? Like, there are questions that parents would ask, but we have got narrowed it down where no one's asking anymore. It's uncomfortable to talk about, but I do feel like it's a very worthy endeavor for people like you and I, my therapist, RC, to talk about it publicly and have a transparent conversation where our listeners today, they don't have to say anything. They can pause and stop listening to this at any time where they feel like they need to protect themselves, but they can also listen and absorb that this happens and there's something you can do. And it doesn't have to be this big thing. It can just be, do you need something to eat today? what do you feel like you need? You need to lay down? Well, let's go put you in a little blanket for 15 minutes. And I know it's a little weird when they're not your children, but man, it's not hard to get that kind of care for kids. I think when we look at the conversation around family within high demand religions, which I was in the Mormon religion, there's a huge focus on the purity and sanctity of children, but we don't really prize them as people. It's more as possessions. And I hope that as we continue to talk about it, we can talk about how do we have conversations with kids that are meaningful for development outside of a religious context? Because
Sure.
I don't think there's a lot of that going on. You kind of mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, and I want to say this because I can't remember who reached out to me about you.
Oh,
Was it somebody, was it Heather? Is that I can't remember now.
I don't know.
I get people
Maybe,
I get
maybe.
people multiple times a week that contact me to be on the podcast, and I do
Oh,
sometimes get mixed up as to who reached out. But
oh
I
gosh, I don't
remember
know, but thank you,
but I
whoever it
remember when
was.
you sent me the note and said that you had read my bio and saw that I
Yeah.
went to BYU, and you said I have some things that might disturb you in my book about because I was LDS. So I just want the listeners to realize you and I didn't know each other. I
No.
had no idea that you were brought up Mormon until you told me that. And I thought, what a coincidence for one, because you were raised, what, in Oklahoma, I believe, and now you're
Yes.
living in Dallas, Texas. So, I mean, so
We don't
listeners,
know.
this was just a unique thing. But because of that, we understand each other a little bit when it comes to talking the language of Mormonism. We both understand it. So when you
Yes.
talk about your grandfather being on the High Council, I know what that is.
Oh, he
Yeah,
was. So this is where I can really get in because it's hard to talk when you don't have the language of that specific religion. So
right.
my grandfather was a bishop. He was a first counselor, a second counselor. He was a high councilman. He was a very respected and revered person in the community. He also was a World War II vet, and he grew up in rural Oklahoma. And I really, truly believe that background made him into the monster he was. And he actually found the Mormon religion when my mother was 15, I think. And I think he found the Mormon religion and he found divine righteousness to justify his existing proclivities. And when I say that from a perspective of he lived in a house with four women. My mom and her two sisters and my grandmother all lived in this house with a man who needed divine authority to be supreme, so to speak. In addition, he was an engineer. He worked for NASA for a while and CES. He was very thoughtful in planning how he was going to, I'm going to say, ramp his operation, and found a lot of resources in the Mormon church. And the things that I think, like the Mormon church didn't ever really get into my soul because it didn't make sense from the beginning for me. But for him, he found like minded individuals that believe white men are the top and everything else is going to serve them for eternity. I never developed a bond for that. But when I was young, the breaking point, which I know you've talked about before, where you hit that breaking point for me, it was 4, which brings us all the way back because I was told not to show my privates to anybody, but yet the priesthood men were allowed to do that to me. I was told as I grew older. So the next time I told someone my bishop was 8, I didn't want to get baptized because when you turn 8, you get baptized. And I did not have faith in this religion. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be in it. And I was punished pretty severely for not having strong faith. And the last time I told my best friend's mom, because my sister had been born and she was about to turn 4 and I couldn't protect her. I, I, I was 9 and I couldn't protect her. And I desperately reached out for someone to help me. And again, I was punished pretty severely. So as I grew in the church, I got to a point where in young women's, as we all know, you split. When you hit that 12-year-old mark, you split, and men and women get completely different teachings from then on out. Women's is mostly about virginity, purity, and your role in supporting men for the rest of your life. I was not going to support any man for the rest of my life. I had no interest in being a wife and a mother. Spoiler alert, I totally am, but on my own terms. But I lost my virginity long before I knew what it even was. I had been raped so many times by the time I got to young women that listening to them talk about purity when I knew I was having these experiences to cement my purity. Like there was never a point when I looked at the church and said, yeah, this is going to help me. It is shocking to me that people continue to believe in a religion that so blatantly does supply information. It's just people don't do their due diligence.
Well, and we discussed this earlier. You are the religion of your parents. Most
Yeah.
people are born into this.
Yeah.
And unless there's something that prods you to question, because that's the
Yeah.
first thing, you've got to question. And then you have to look. And of course, the leaders say, doubt your doubts.
Doubt your
Don't
doubts.
look. Don't study anything that's not approved by the church. So it's a wonderful, wonderful system that they keep people in. Because what will happen is people will be like, huh, well, he's super smart and he believes, so gosh, it must be true. Well, he's super smart, but he's not smart enough to question and to look. But I want to go back to what you said earlier about how you kind of had realized that this wasn't going to work for you at a very young age.
Yeah.
And while you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, well, you're looking at these members in high positions within your local community there in Oklahoma that are doing these horrific things to you, possibly to others. Yeah, I think it would be natural that you don't want to be a part of that. I mean, but see, if you'd had an experience, if you'd had an experience like the one I had, where I'm looking at my parents and my grandparents, and they were just wonderful examples to me of just being good people and encouraging us to do good things and being supportive. And so I didn't have that experience. So I didn't have those questions. I didn't have that kind of a role model in my life. If I did, perhaps I would have left much sooner too. So
I definitely feel lucky that I didn't have to fight that battle. I know how difficult that must be for people who have an adult level faith in that system. And I can't imagine what it must be to let go of something. I know what it feels like. For me, my faith was in my family. I really thought they were taking care of me for a long time. And then I thought they were done hurting me. And then I got to the point where I was like, oh, they don't care about me at all. It's very Handmaid's Tale. Like it's very women are only allowed to be useful from a supporting role and a birthing perspective. And I wasn't interested in those things ever. Like I never having bodily autonomy meant that that's all I wanted. I just wanted to live by myself, and I wanted to, like, that was my dream, was to be on my own and have to cut off access to my body to anyone at any time for any reason. And it seemed like a wild dream. It seemed like a really wild dream because the Mormon church is so hands-on your body, especially as a female. You have to wear specific underwear. You have to cover, like, I know I have an extreme case, but at 4 years old, I was being told how cute and precious and sexy I was. Like, I understand that was feedback from bad sources, but it were messages I received my entire life. Like, I always thought my body was a weapon. That if I exposed a piece of it, men just couldn't help themselves and they were just going to love me and come, do whatever the things they do. They just couldn't help it.
Well, that's
And
the underlying message that women are taught and girls are taught in the church is that
yeah,
you need to be modest to protect these young men and the men in the church because they can't handle seeing some cleavage or seeing some bare shoulders or
yeah.
some legs or whatever. I mean, I don't know, whatever. It's just,
It's
it's hard
it's
to even
so
discuss it
wild.
because when you're looking from the outside back in,
I know.
it's like, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. And I have so many friends and family who still believe and I love them but man, I would love for them to question and ask me something and just maybe point them in a direction because like I told you earlier, the information's out there, but you got to look.
For me, I don't understand how anyone looks at a picture of the Quorum of the 12 and believes in the church. Like, you can't tell me that there aren't women and people of color who are smart enough and devout enough to serve in a leadership role in a spiritual place like that. It continues to validate everything I believe about the Mormon church every time I watch a snippet of General Conference. Every time they make a big deal out of giving women, an inch of their shoulder to show. It is wild that their concessions are seen as these innabulous gifts. I'm like, my body is mine. Like, my body is mine. I get to do what I want with it. You shouldn't be checking my underwear. You shouldn't be checking my purity levels. You shouldn't be tracking my menstrual cycles. And you definitely should not be controlling my connection with God. Like, it is so interesting to me that people put up with people like that. Let me phrase that. It's not interesting. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that there are LGBTQIA plus people who sit in that congregation and are sad because they feel like they're not okay, that their body, the way it was made, or their mind wasn't okay. And that's
They don't
how
necessarily
I was,
feel like it's not okay. They're being told from the pulpit that it's not
yeah,
okay. And I
from
cannot
someone
even
who
begin to tell you
they
how many
choose to give
lives have been
power to.
lost. Yeah.
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 It breaks my heart because you're right. It's hard to leave. It's hard to question everything you've gone through. What I see and what my unique perspective is, it is harder to know I'm going to live a life of another 40 years pretending so that everybody else feels comfortable. My family was like, why now? Why are you doing this to us? Why can't you just let it go? And the church ladies, I can't believe you would say this about these people. They're dead. Let them die. And I'm like, so I have to hold it all inside. I have to carry it every day so that they can rest in peace. I have to carry it. I have to deal with it every night when I go to bed or every time I go to the grocery store and I'm afraid they're going to take me because you don't want to mess up with your church friends. Like, it's a hard message to hear from the world. It's a hard message to hear from the pulpit. Like, you have to leave everything you know if you're unpure. But if someone chooses to take that purity without your consent, you're still the damaged goods. I, I can't believe in a world, there's no life for me if that's the case, because that's all I am.
Yeah. And I guess we should probably maybe just give just a little snippets of some of the things that went on.
Ooh, tell me.
We've already touched on the fact that your grandfather was very revered in his community. And I think that in a way, he used that to his advantage because he knew he could probably get away with things and people weren't going to question him. They certainly weren't going to listen to a 4, 5, 6 year old granddaughter, which was the case. And man, I'm telling you, that's the part as I was reading the book. One part, I mean, there's so many parts, but that was one part that I found so frustrating is that you tried to tell. And we all revere our mothers. And when you go to your mother and she won't support you, as a matter of fact, if anything, she's enabling her father, your grandfather, to do these things. And I think almost every time she was there or close by witnessing what was going on. Maybe not
One
with
of
Uncle
my,
Brad the first time or maybe not with, some of these events, but she was there for a lot of them. So she
yeah,
wasn't supporting you. Your grandfather was behind most of this stuff. Your grandmother also was aware of what was going on. So it was like these are people that normally we would at the top of our list of people we can rely on and count on and that have our back. And it's like when they're not doing it, that's the part that I found like when you're laying down and you're putting your head on your pillow at night, those thoughts that are going through your head of like, this is my family, and I just struggle with that. So maybe touch
I,
on some of that.
I was gonna say I definitely, yes, all the things you said. I don't think of family the way most people do because I've had to work so hard for the family I have. Um, I I do want to say, like, my dad is a great dad. He just wasn't home because he was a traveling salesman. Like, he just wasn't home a lot. And when he was home, things were great. Most of the time when he was home, everything was okay. But holidays or when he's on a business trip, moms are given pretty free rein to raise the children the way they see fit. And if no one questions that, which my dad would have been the only person to do, there was a whole community of people supporting her, not knowing the decision she was making. If I think with kindness and compassion, I believe my mom was a victim of something too. She has her own
Oh
demons
yeah,
she
I
deals with.
felt that way. Yeah.
Yeah. However, she made a choice when she had me. And my feeling is from the moment I was born, she wasn't real thrilled because once you're not a baby, well, even when you're a baby, like you're crying and pooping and you require a lot of care and you don't give a lot back. And that continues through childhood. Toddler years are pretty good. You're pretty lovable then, and you're not that wretched. But once you start developing, her need to control my intellect manifested in her participation in the abuse of me. I suspect that is a generational issue on many levels on a spectrum. I'm at the worst end of the spectrum, I think, but I think there were a lot of people who had parents who fought in a war who got told to come home and hide their feelings. And it was some horrific shit. I mean, we're talking about Hitler and concentration camps. And I mean, you don't see that kind of fighting and treatment of people without being affected. And then they had children, and they had children who they had no interest in developing emotional intelligence. It was all about achievement. And so this generation of my parents grew up thinking that they just constantly had to achieve and produce. And now they're very bereft of emotional intelligence because they were never taught. And so when you have a child and they have abuse and you're in the middle of abuse, like you have two choices. You either beat them or join them. I know how unique I am for beating them because no one else made it out. I mean, my sister and brother are longtime drug addicts. They're homeless. They stay with her still. My niece, Destiny, who's in the book,
Hmm.
I don't know where she is, but she left our house because she couldn't make safe choices. And, my mom's a mess. My aunts are pretty vicious. I mean, like, I'm the only one who made it out. So it can't be easy to leave, even when it's horrible.
And I suspect that a lot of the things that happened to you happened to some of them as well.
I mean, it's
Um,
learned behavior. I wasn't the first. There's no way they were trying things out. I think
right.
the only thing maybe was the big awful. And I feel like he had killed before, but that one was the first like ritual because I know there were other people there.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that as I was explaining this to my wife, I was saying a lot of the times when these things happened, there were other people there, either
Mm.
A, participating or B, at least watching and observing. And that to me was just mind blowing.
Let me blow your mind a little more
Yeah.
because those people I haven't named, I know them. I know their children. I know their grandchildren. The Mormon church is very interconnected. And I have stories about these people. And I've been sitting with them, hoping that their children and grandchildren would say something, that it wouldn't have to be me standing out there on my own. I'm not in a rush. It hadn't come up and I'm not worried about it. But what I will say is he was well supported. And there is a whole gaggle of priesthood men organizing and deciding what comes next. And every move I make, I know they're watching me because they've got legal troubles that are far beyond me. I'm just a gnat right now, but I'm going to be a problem at some point because all of those men had my grandfather over for their own rituals.
Mhm.
Like that white room is a room in a building on a floor plan in multiple Mormon buildings. Like you and I both know when you start looking, that room is the exact same as the one in Warren Jeffs. The document rooms that are hidden in behind every building has a document room, every building has a secret document room. I'm like, those are floor plans. Like, those are floor plans used in multiple places. This is doctrine. It might not be practiced by everyone, but it is absolutely, there are outlines, there are policies, there are structures in place to proliferate this behavior. And a huge piece came out just, I think it was last year or the year before. There's a lawsuit going on in Utah right now. It's fairly small, but it'll get bigger about the hotline that the church had to report child abuse by clergy. When clergy, they'd call it priesthood, but there's a hotline that they could call to circumvent the process, very similar to what the Catholics had. There's paperwork, there's process, there's not reporting, and there is organizational structure and knowledge behind those processes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, to me, if you're not getting answer to those questions when you ask, you do not need to put your child at that risk. And that's what I am trying to do is of all of those men that I know that are out there, I am trying to save the kids. Moms, stop putting your kids in those men's hands. That's it.
Yep.
That's all I'm asking.
Yep.
And it is wild how many women fight me. They are vicious. And it is those men's wives, daughters, mothers, sisters. That's who it is. When you look on my social media, you'll see them. They would rather put their own children at risk than admit that they believed a pedophile or a murderer
Do you
or
know
whatever.
that the changes, there's been a number of changes in the LDS church for the last 5-10 years. Many of the changes that have happened have come because of post-Mormons bringing things
Yeah.
up like this. The stuff you're talking
Yeah.
about right now, I guarantee you there are people from the church that are assigned to listen to these podcasts, to attend. We had a Thrive conference here 2 weeks ago in St. George,
Yeah.
420, 450 people there. We know that somebody from the church was there watching
Yeah.
and reporting because that's what they do. But at the end of the day,
I had somebody just show up at my signing and I had to convince my moderator. I was like, oh, yeah, she was from the church. I know what she was doing there.
yeah.
Like, I know what they're doing.
Well,
I'm
you
not
mentioned the
foolishness. I don't
lawsuit
have
here in
anything to hide.
Utah. Yeah, there's lawsuits everywhere. There's a lawsuit in Oregon right now. There's lawsuits in California. And the
Oh,
reason is,
yeah.
and what the thing you were talking about when they talk about reporting this hotline, yeah, if somebody comes in and there's some abuse, somebody, maybe a 14-year-old girl comes in and talks about her dad abusing her, the bishop then won't call the authorities. They'll call Curtin McConkie, which are the church's attorneys, and that's the hotline number. And then they get involved, and then they go, and sometimes they'll pay families off and have them sign an NDA that they won't bring it up again. I know personally of a few of these. But you tell people that are in the church and they just say, you're just angry, you're just bitter, you just can't let it go. And it's like, you don't understand. It's not that. I'm kind of past the anger phase because there definitely
Yeah.
was one. Remember that
Yeah.
old expression, the truth will set you free? I always say
Mhm.
the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
Yeah. It'll
So
piss you off.
I went through that phase. I'm now just to
Yeah.
the phase
Yeah.
of just, trying to maybe be the conduit to provide factual information. And if people get it and don't want to act on it, that's on them. But I mean, the information, truth is always going to, I hope, always kind of be the thing that will win out. I'm such a believer in truth.
So, me too. And I think it's something you told me your story. You said you've told your audience before
Mm-hmm.
about how you broke with the church.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I want to comment on that I just gave me light, and it is what is really giving me energy right now is thank God for the internet. Like the free flow of unimpeded information. It is the only reason you and I are sitting here and talking today.
Mm-hmm.
It is because I found a platform because it sure as hell ain't Meta.
Yeah,
I
right.
found a platform where I could go and say what I wanted to say, and 2 million people saw it. Like that would not happen without somebody signing off any other way. And I'm like, that is what has all these religions upset because it does not matter if we're talking Catholic or Muslim or Mormon. They all depend on a certain amount of secrecy, whether that is ritual or it is sacred text or, objects, whatever it is, there is secrecy. And secrecy is all about limited information, controlling that flow of information. And we are living at a time where I published a book and not a single man told me how to do it. Not one. And I just had a conversation with a woman in Scotland the other day who was like, I bought your book, I read it, I had the same problems, and let's compare notes. Like, holy crap. Yes, the internet's been around for a while, but the opportunity to put out a story with absolutely no interference is having them all shaking in their boots because the thing I love, and I know it's controversial, but the thing I love about TikTok is you can see something so real and authentic without the filter of another lens of control. So let me give you an example. As I mentioned, my professional career was in PR and communications. Many times over my career, I supported the top level of executives. We're talking COO, CEO, people who make tens of millions of dollars of every year. My whole job was to listen to them, say the worst things, and make it sound prettier. So when they sit down and say, we're going to fire 10,000 people to save a few $1,000,000 on our executive bonuses, I have to go, we are doing so well. We're looking at making new opportunities and growing in new ways. Like, that was my job. And there are a lot of us paid to sculpt the conversation and the flow of information online. And when you find something as wild as TikTok or as honest and truthful as Blue Sky, like, it is a flow of information that cannot be harnessed, at least not yet. It was for a few days last month, I admit, but now we know what we're capable of. And that flow of information, you can avoid it as long as you want to, but there is absolutely going to be consequences for that. And I think those of us who have seen or gone through this process can see the world of hurt and anger that people are going to go through as that information starts to parse itself out. Because it will. I mean, it'll even out at some point. But I don't think Delulu is going to be a very popular option for much longer.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of step back for a moment too and talk about your dad. Your grandfather told you that if you ever told, and this is another part of keeping secrets, especially with a little child, he told you, if you say anything, I will kill your father. And not only that, I will cut him up in little pieces. For a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old girl to hear this, and you had that special relationship with your dad, you loved your dad. And I should point out, your dad was not a member of the church.
Right.
And so he wasn't part of the group. He wasn't part, and your grandfather, that was a real distinction because of that.
Yes. Yes.
It was a real, obviously they weren't close and didn't bond. I mean, over possibly other things, but certainly because he wasn't part of that religion. So you didn't want to tell a lot or say a lot out of fear for your father. I think that's important because you always had a good relationship with your dad. And I think sometimes, especially people who haven't read the book yet, they might be questioning that, like, why didn't you talk to your dad or whatever? So just wanted to point that out.
I outline in the book twice I can think of the Oxley Nature Center story and the Big Awful. Those were, well, and I guess the blue dress too, but there were several times that my grandfather was very specific that if I said anything to my dad, he would kill my dad. I had seen him kill men in front of me, so I knew he was capable of terminating him. And then it became, when I got older, and I say older between 12 and 16, it became a point of, I don't know, pressure. Like, he would molest me in the bathroom at Christmas, and he'd be like, you can just scream. Just scream. Because my dad, like, I could hear him laughing in the next room. But I had one thing in my life, and it was my dad. Like, I would have laid down in traffic for him. I learned to be compliant for him, and I don't regret that. And I truly do feel like he was the best dad he could be in that situation. Like, my grandfather, in my mind, had enough power and enough influence to kill people and not get caught. And no one was I mean, he was never arrested. He was never publicly embarrassed for his behavior. Now, behind closed doors, I know one of his companies, he was forced into early retirement, and he was pretty pissed about that. I was too young to understand what happened, but there are definitely breadcrumbs along the way that show that he had some issues. But he is a upstanding white man in an Oklahoma community in a place where he grew up. His family was around there when the Black Wall Street massacre occurred. Like, we're not talking about people who have a really good grip on kindness and inclusion. And so that dominating factor was always a pressure point with my dad. And my dad was kind enough to care about the welfare of his children enough to stay in that horrible environment. I mean, my mom's wretched. My grandparents hated him because he wasn't in the church. He wasn't in the church. He wasn't in the group, but he stuck it out for us kids. And to be honest, like it wasn't perfect, but geez, at least I know he loved me enough to care for me enough to get me out. And we talk all the time and I still go see him and we're very close. And he is not a emotional man. He is not handling this well, but by God, he's trying.
Yeah.
And can we really ask anything else? I mean, like, that's all I ask from him. I'm like, he has held my hand and gone, this is crazy. And I hate it, but I'm here and I will do whatever you need me to do. And he has. Him and my nanny both have just been, they have been the parents that I always wanted. And I would rather have that than never have it at all.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing that you were able to survive and
Yeah.
get out like you did, because I don't know of the abuse that might have happened to your younger brother because he was a boy, and
Right.
they clearly had different things in mind for boys than girls. Of course, I wondered about your sister. I wondered how she ended up, because I figured the same things were happening to her. And so,
She's online. She's made some videos that weren't very nice. Like I said, she has long-term, very deep drug use, but she has also had two children taken away from her by the church. I think if she ever really explores that, she will have access to information and find out. I don't know all the things that happened during those times. I know she never stood a chance of keeping either one of those child. And the church has a lot of back alleys, as a lot of churches do, to deal in unfit mothers
mhm,
with babies.
mhm.
I mean, that's not a secret. And, I know she made choices about how to use her body that I don't agree with, but she also was being sabotaged. And I suspect it was to control her and keep her quiet, because to give a drug addict drugs and keep them sedated is much easier than what they were trying to do for me.
Do you know if she has been able to come clean about what happened to her, or is she in denial?
To the best of my knowledge, the last time we talked, she did call me after my first video went viral. We hadn't talked in like 20 years, not since my niece was born. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't nice. However, it wasn't unkind. She said, this didn't happen to me. You're a liar. Like, why are you saying this? And I go, look, I don't know what your experience was, because after the big awful, I realized I couldn't save her. I was 9 years old. I had no one on my side and I just couldn't do it. And so I cut that, like, I just cut her off. I was never a sister to her. I was never on her side because I couldn't and survive. Like, I just couldn't bring her along. I was not a good sister. I was not supportive. I was not there for her. However, she doesn't know all the things that happened before she got there, and she has no idea what my life has been like since. We didn't live the same lives, even though we lived in the same home.
Okay. We're talking about your story, and of course, we talk a lot about the things that happened when you were a child, and we've touched a little bit even on some of your adolescence as you got a little older. But where was the point where you were able to leave home and kind of get out of that environment? How did that happen?
It's a good story. So, two things. The first thing was I graduated high school, and my father fought really hard to let me go to college. And my grandparents did not see any use for an educated woman. But I really wanted to go. I had really good grades. I made it in, and my grandparents had the money, and they were like, well, we're not paying. And my dad was like, it's fine. And he helped me get student loans. And I worked 3 jobs through college. and I graduated in 4 years. I had a job lined up in California to go and like work in the music industry. And I was like going to be this big deal. My mother sabotaged it. As soon as I graduated college and became fit enough bodily to do so, which was about 5 to 6 months, I bought a horrible apartment in a shitty part of town and I moved out and I worked at a hair salon as the manager, just as a front desk girl, and I made it work. I made it work. And I got a job teaching. I taught dance for 20 years and it was the love of my life. And I was so happy. Like I was poor as a church mouse and I had no support, but by God, I was really, really happy. And then I met my husband and kind of went
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah, well, and we should point out that you, even though you had all this abuse going on in your life, you still had some parts of your life that were fun. And I know that you danced in high school, right? And that was
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
a fun thing for you. And not only through high school, because you just said you did it for 20 years, you taught it. So I mean, that's been
yeah,
something you've been able to continue on with. So that's good. I'm
yeah.
just glad that you still had some positives in your life
Oh
without this,
man,
gray cloud
so
and
many.
shadow always hanging over you.
As I describe in the very last chapters of my book, the big awful split my psyche, basically. I don't have multiple personalities, but I definitely am not just one person. I have bits of me that are fractured and young and hold those really horrific memories. Because of that, I also created a version of myself all during junior high years. As adolescents, you figure out how you're going to start navigating your life on a long-term basis. And I realized I had to live two lives. I lived the life when I was with my family, and I lived a totally different life when I was at school or doing activities I wanted to do. So people who talk to me, about me in high school, like I was a pom-pom princess, like I was popular and I was on the pom team and I made straight A's and I was on student council and I was an activity, a joiner, like nothing to see here. I am living my best teenage dream. And then I would go home and be cockroach girl. Like I would just do whatever I was told to do, whatever meant I was going to be hurt the least amount. And I will go into those details in a future book, I think, because it got pretty bad from that perspective. But I took such ownership and pride in the persona that I tried to present because I didn't want to be the broken girl. I didn't want to be the sad girl. I know who that girl is, and it's a harder life than I could bear.
Mhm.
And so I needed lift and I needed fun. And all I had access to was my public education. And so I used it for everything it was worth. I took every class I wanted to, I joined every club I could. I was there as much as I could be there to get access to people and safety and food, as much as I possibly could. And it worked. Like I love dancing. It's my favorite thing. I love coaching kids. I coached for 20 years roughly, and I love all of them. It was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. And I have an incredible husband and son. I had an awesome career. I live in a beautiful house. Like I built a gorgeous life for myself, but I was living two lives and it broke me. Like I ran out of steam. I couldn't do it forever. And they were never going to let me go, which is how the book starts is they came after me. Like I thought I was done. Like I thought I was home free. I thought I had broken all of the ties that I had escaped and they came for me. And I'm just like, I can no longer live that carefree life. So now I'm just like, there are no more secrets. I'm just not keeping anymore. Like, don't tell me. I don't want to know. And if you've got secrets that you're hiding, especially those priesthood members, get your house in order because it's coming down. I don't have anything to lose at this point. Like, you can take my house, you can take my car, but you'll never take my mind.
Mhm.
Like, I will always have it. I will never again in my life stop painting or writing or drawing or watching and listening to other people's stories. It is
It's
the
and
most
speaking your
valuable
truth.
currency.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the most valuable currency in this life.
There's so many things that I thought of as we're talking, but listeners, buy the book.
Please
Looking
ask
the
me
knife
questions.
because
Send
I've
me
got things I
DMs.
want to yeah, I got things I want to bring up, but it's like I don't want to tell your whole story. You got a little book here that you're marketing too. So I mean,
I was going to say, I am open to any and all questions. Please DM me, send me, do a video review and tag me. Like, I love the interaction, and people, with the exception of maybe like five, people have been so nice. They are so supportive, and they believe me, and they listen and they share, and they have experiences like this. I told Larry this when we started. I never in a million years thought I would have a white man member of the priesthood say, I believe you. Like, you don't know what power that holds for a young girl who was never believed by those specific kinds of people. And it is my number one message, that if I can tell anyone, it's that we really need to understand that we cannot judge books by their cover. I know so many white men who are absolute angels, and I know so many heinous white women who are evil. I know Black women that stood up to my grandfather, and I know old men who just beat down on little girls. Like, that trope of what we think is safe or authoritative or telling the truth is changing. And we have the opportunity, and by we, I mean me and people with different experiences that are hard, that are traumatic, can just share them with the freedom that so many other people have enjoyed their whole lives. And I think that's what gets us past the cover. I think that's what's in the book, is when you see an experience and a perspective like my own, it helps you, the listener, or the reader in this case, see, oh, I'm not the only one who thinks like this, or, oh, I had never considered that before. Like, it just makes you a better person.
the only thing I would say, though, you said it's probably not true. It would be I'm not a priesthood holder anymore.
Oh, yeah, not anymore.
I gave that
Just
up.
how about this? You were allowed to at some point.
Yeah,
That's
I still have
the
the same amount of
permission.
power as I had before because it's all in your head. Let me just say this, and this is one more thing. This is just a little carrot I'm going to dangle for the people out there that are thinking about buying your book. We didn't really
Okay.
even talk about some of the torture that you went through, but you mentioned how much you enjoyed the food when you were in school, in the public schools, because that was one thing that was withheld from you when you were a little child.
You know, growing up as a young woman, you're never happy with your weight, with your body fat, with your health. It is only as a 40 plus year old woman that I have even gotten to a point where I don't count every single calorie that goes in my mouth. The Mormon church specifically is very good at coming up with ways to torture you without leaving a mark on you. And I'll give you some examples. My mother, in one of my stories, put black pepper on my tongue. It is a story she tells all the time to all her friends, to all of our friends and family, that because I was such a naughty little brat, I bit some kid and she put black pepper on my tongue. And that story was held over my head for my whole life. Me taking ownership and going, she put it on my tongue for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. And I couldn't breathe. It was so much, like, it would make me sick for days. And I know I remember hearing my friends' moms talk about that. My friends in the church. I recently saw a girl that I grew up with in the church, and she's like, oh, yeah, I don't talk to my mom anymore. I'm like, I would hope not. And I remember it's her face just, what? And I'm like, well, yeah, like kneeling on the wet tea towel. Like, no one's ever going to know how bad that hurts, but man, it's awful. It is horrible. It is torture. And I would do it for hours and hours, or she would put this brace on my back where I would stand up straight and walk by with a knife and stick me if I didn't hold my posture correctly. Like, it is uncomfortably horrible to hear the kind of things that she came up with to hurt me. But if I had told anyone, shit, even now, my whole family will not deny that I had black pepper on my tongue, or that I bit a kid, or that I had sensitive skin and I was allergic to bubble baths, or that I couldn't drink strawberry soda. Like, they all know that my mom was torturing me. They're just like, is it really that bad? And that's kind of where we get in trouble. Is in my world, anything over 0 is that bad. You don't need to physically hurt someone to make them understand a basic concept. You just don't.
When your grandfather and your mother were banging on the door of your house and your windows, it seems like, and I could be wrong here and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like that was kind of instrumental in you finally because you've been meeting with RC already, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But wasn't
We
this
had a relationship for years.
yeah, but
Yeah.
wasn't this a kind of an instrumental part in you beginning to recall a
Yeah.
lot of what
It's
went
the
on?
inciting incident. So Destiny leaving, she left on how the day after Halloween. So it's 3 months, 4 months. We went through the holidays. We didn't have any contact with the family or her. And when the family found out that she had left the home, they were furious because I was supposed to be controlling her. I was supposed to be watching her and helping her. They thought grow into they thought I was taking her over to control her because she was so out of control. Thought I was taking her to get her out. She, on the other hand, was so glad to be out that she couldn't deal with what she was going through. And we tried, but she wasn't ready. And so she left the home and they found out about it. So that 4 month time period, we had no conversation. And then when they came to my house, it reminded me of another time. It was a flashback of another time where my brother came to my house and banged on the door and was freaking out and crying. The police were called. He was dragged out. Like, it was very traumatic. And I looked at my mother as she's banging on my door and we're yelling. And I said, I remember the last time this happened and you were inside and afraid with me. And this time you're on the outside banging the door. Why? And she smiled at me and she said, because she just smiled at me and she just laughed like, you idiot. What do you think we're here for? And my grandpa just looked at me like, we need to make sure that you don't ever say anything. Like, it was just this moment of where they were like, I am never going to let you go. You will never escape us. When I get in moments where I feel like I'm backed into a corner, I'm like, okay, how do I walk on the ceiling? And the only option I thought was, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to go all the way down the rabbit hole. And if I die, I die, but I'm going to record it. And I did. I recorded every moment of it. I recorded whether it's written or it's on voice or video or whatever, I have it recorded. So if something happens to me, that information is out there forever.
You might want to point out that Dave didn't know anything about this stuff either
No.
and was pretty surprised when you told him.
Everybody, everybody's been pretty surprised. The people who love me the most are the most upset by it because they know these people And they watched these people treat me shitty for years. And I covered, I demurred, I abdicated, I gave away, I made it okay. I made it comfortable for everyone to treat me that way. And so those people thought that was okay if it was okay by me. And now they're struggling because they're like, well, these people are that bad. How did I not know? Or how did you not trust me enough to say something? And I'm like, I would prefer if you look at it like, oh my God, my cousin lived in my house with my husband and I for a while, and he's Uncle Brad's son. He's rotten to the core, and no one got hurt but me. I thought that was a success. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was protecting my son. If I can take all of the abuse, if I can do everything they tell me to do, they will be safe. I can handle it. I am strong. My husband and I have a really close relationship, and this has brought us so much closer. And for him to recognize and accept that that's what it was protection and not lying or manipulation. It shows a lot of maturity and kindness on his end, which is part of the reason I love him so much, because we do hide things from each other, and we're embarrassed of things we've done or places we've been or things we've endured. And I don't think we necessarily have the right time to sit down and go, hey, I need to take a year off of work because I need to tell you about my family abuse. Let me go down this shithole where I'm just not going to be productive or basically any good to you in the next year. As a woman, as a wife, as a mother, and as a post young woman who grew up in the Mormon church, like your whole purpose is to serve. And if you have to stop to take care of yourself, like, who are you? What are you doing? So he's very compassionate in listening to why I made the choices I made, and that there's no culpability or anger from his, I'm not mad at my husband or my father. I feel like they loved me and protected me and trusted me to take care of myself. And now I'm like, I need you to help me a little bit and take care of me. And they do. They've stepped up to the plate.
Well, I'm glad you had those positive role models, those male role
I
models in your
did.
life,
Yeah.
because man, you had some bad
I had some
examples.
bad ones. But aren't I a lucky girl to have the good ones, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
I
you
I
are.
continue to reinforce the good things in my life because that's where I want to spend my energy. And talking about this may sound very difficult for most people, but for me, it's like for the first time in my life, people see me as a full human being and not just the pretty, pretty princess that makes everybody feel happy and comfortable. And that's feels good. It's interesting. It's different.
Yeah, well, but to be able to vocalize these secrets that you've held for all these years, I mean, that's got to be healthy, but also, you know, fuck you to all those guys that, fucked you over, And I'm
It's
glad
so
that you called
hard
them
to do.
out. Yeah, I'm glad you called them out. I'm glad that they got named, and I could care less if they're offended or put out by it. It's like I would love for some sort of authorities, that could do something to take care of these guys. But unfortunately, as you've mentioned in the book, they were well connected in the community, they were respected, and that happens a lot, unfortunately.
And I will say this, there is a long history of my family with legal services, police department, human services, child protective services. I mean, documents going well back into the 90s. However, I also understand that they operate within the limitations of their organization, their policies, their procedures. And I don't have a naive enough view to think that that works. I've seen enough cop shows to know that bad people go free.
Mhm.
I'm not mad, but I have seen a little bit of spark from local law enforcement in compassion with my story. And there are bodies to be found. There's a treasure box to be found. There is a gun. There is property. There's warehouses. There's all these things that could be found if that was a option that people want to pursue. Like, I don't have the means to do that. However, I do think law enforcement is more aware of the church and the trafficking they're doing of the tiny humans they're in charge of. And if I call attention to that, or I save just a few kids from not being in primary with some of those men, I feel like I changed the world. That is some kid that is not being forced to go in and be hurt by their parents just because somebody has a position of authority or has a long-standing history in the community.
Yeah. And I want to say too that not that it matters. I mean, because people aren't, you can give people facts, you can tell them things and they'll just, disregard it. But obviously when we talk about the Mormon church, we're not talking about everybody in the Mormon church. It's a few. It's not the majority. It's a very small minority. But the problem is that there's cover up, and that's the problem.
Yes. And it's not just the Mormon church either. Like, we look at what happened, publicly and with the Catholic Church and what has gone on in Hillsong and IABC, like any religion where male patriarchy is seen as the only divine path, like, it's just not going to work because you're missing, whole areas of experience and perspective. And anyone who wants to lead to a divine awakening has to understand a human experience is so vast beyond the small sliver that we get from whatever our chosen deity is. So I know it's not a solvable problem on a large scale, but I absolutely know for a fact that one mom who knows these people sent me a note and said, "Hey, thanks for telling me I'm not letting my granddaughter go around these people." And I'm like, that's amazing. She doesn't have to make a declaration. She didn't have to tell me, but she made a decision that will save those children and alter the course of their life. And I'm like, it's literally that simple, because the thing they fear the most, it's not prison, it's not the legal, it's not the legal stuff. It's exposure. It's the disgust. It's when someone who looks like you goes, "Gross. I don't look at little girls and go, yeah, you're hot." No.
Yeah.
But it's, for so long we've been worried about like hurting people's feelings or whatever. I'm like, no, you need to say, no, that's not okay. I don't have that problem. I don't ogle girls at the pool. Like, that's not a thing. Like, my dad doesn't ever ogle young women at the beach. Like, that's not a thing he does.
I can tell you that is not a normal behavior. And,
exactly.
That's as simple as that.
There's a narrative that it
thing.
is. I'm like, no, it's not normal. The men who know, you wonderful, sweet, kind men, you don't get enough credit. And you've been told for a long time that sensitivity and kindness was weakness. And I'm like, it's not. It's what saves people's lives. It's what real divine intervention looks like in my case. I don't need eternity. I have a wonderful life. I'm very happy. I'm not worried about what happens after I die. I'm more worried that we're going to go under a totalitarian regime and I'm going to be a handmaid. Like, the loss of my bodily autonomy scares me more than the afterlife.
Yeah, if there's one thing that I would like to eliminate from the earth, it would be patriarchy, because I do not know. Women seem okay with it for the most part. I mean, if you just said you don't need eternity. Well, can you imagine the whole goal of a Mormon woman is to reach the celestial kingdom and share her husband with hundreds, if not thousands, of other wives? Now, they don't like to talk about that, but that's the belief, is that they're going to be in a polygamous relationship.
That's what I spent my whole life
eternity.
preparing for. Like, my grandfather, all the things he did were to prepare me for that, because he thinks, I mean, he's dead. He died four days after I confronted him. He died, and he thinks, according to him, he is on his own planet. And my grandma's there. And when my mom dies, she'll be there. And when my aunts die, they'll be there. And when I die, I'll be there. And my sister, and on and on. He will have us all as his harem for the rest of eternity. And that's all I had to look forward to, was being prepared to be his. And I'm just like, religion doesn't really offer a great view for women. Mormon religion doesn't really offer much to women at all,
Yeah.
or
Any high
Black
demand
people, or
religion.
LGBTQIA. Like, they don't, it's like, if you're not a white dude, like, your life is basically just to serve me. And I'm like, that doesn't give you enough to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah, you would think that. And again, it's not just the Mormon. Any high demand
No, no,
religion is
no.
set up to benefit the men and keep the women in line. And I just don't, too many women are okay with that. And I just wish they wouldn't be. But hey, I have
It's
so
hard.
much enjoyed you being here, Sabrina. This has been
I
so
gotta say, this has
interesting. And
been so lovely, Larry. Thank you.
oh, you're so welcome. And I tell you, the book is not an easy read. I told you that when we were talking before. And you say in the beginning of the book, hey, there might be sentences you've got to skip, or pages you
Yeah.
have to, or chapters you just may not want to read, because it's a hard read to see what these people did to you and what they put you through. But to see where you are now, I mean, it's just, I'm so happy for you, and I'm happy for the
Thank
life
you.
that you're living now.
Thank you. I'll tell you what, like, Heyman Taylor is one of my favorite, and it's coming back on. So that's why I caught in my mind. But like, I watch it going through all the hard parts, knowing June Osborne's going to come back and she's going to stab Waterford and she's going to kick ass and she's going to get it. And I'm like, that's where I am. Like, I made it. I made it through. And whatever else is after this, it won't ever be that bad again. So I'm like, man, I hope people can make it through the bad so that they can go, okay, this is doable. That's what I always wanted to see. I wanted to see someone with a story as rotten as mine and see them thriving and see them living. And I did. Surprisingly enough, it turned out to be like The Color Purple was one of my favorite, or The Handmaid's Tale, or, just stories of women who are just like, I just endured it. And then I kicked ass anyway. And I'm like, man, I think that is the hardest thing for some of those women who support patriarchy to follow, is that they don't quite have the courage to try something else. It's like, I just do what my mom did and my grandma did because tradition, or that's expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, life is so much more full when you can live for yourself.
100%. Yep. Totally agree.
And your own story, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, Sabrina, once again, thanks so much for sharing your story today. And
You bet.
I know I've made another friend here, and that's what I feel like every
Yes.
time I finish one of these, is I've created a new friendship. So,
Always.
yeah,
And please, any listeners, send me notes, send me DMs. You can find me on all platforms, and it's just my name, Sabrina Capper.
yeah. Is it sabrinacapper.com?
SabrinaCapper.com works. Yep. I actually have that. I have Sabrina Capper on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the things. TikTok is my community. That's my home. Everything gets reposted across platforms. So if you really want to talk to me on TikTok. But SabrinaCapper.com works just fine. You can see my artwork there in collection as I continue to post that.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that, but you're
I
doing a
know we
lot
didn't
of
talk about it, but
artwork
we'll
now.
get
But
to it.
yeah, yeah.
I'm writing a children's book. Sorry, I should say a pictured book about emotions right now, kind of expanding on that language that we talked about at the very, very beginning, which is, how do you talk to kids about what they're feeling? Maybe they feel like a porcupine. Maybe their tummy feels like a rhinoceros and it's just big and lumpy. So that'll come out later, and then we can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll revisit. So the other thing I guess I would say is that right now it's pretty clear to anybody who's listening to this, especially even if they haven't read your book, that they can see that you've been able to survive that, and you're living your best life, and that's all that we are hopeful we can all be doing, right?
100%. This is my dream. Writing my books, painting my paintings, getting to have interesting conversations with new people. This is my life. I'm very proud.
Well, and I just wish you the best going forward. And
Thank
I just
you.
want to tell the listeners, 2 weeks from now, we're going to have another interesting guest here on Nobody Knows Your Story. So check back in. Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Down a little old country road not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy